Hello, and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in this episode, we'll be reviewing Jordan Peele's follow-up to Get Out, Us, and then asking, what's the ideal horror movie ending? But first, Nick, what do you have to recommend to our listeners?
Well, not something I've actually recommended to the listeners for a while, and I guess it's still a slightly qualified recommendation, but I've been watching Season 9 of The Walking Dead.
It's still going.
Yeah, incredibly it is still going, although they do seem to be finally dropping the original cast at a fairly hard pace. They've dropped Andrew Lincoln this year. Lauren Cohan, who plays Maggie, seems to be on the way out in a sort of weird, long, protracted exit where she just doesn't appear in episodes for long periods of time. And Danai Gurira, who, of course, is now far better known as one of the Dora Milaje in Black Panther, is, I think, going to be leaving next year as well to, I'm guessing, pursue her movie career, I suppose. Or maybe Marvel just wants her to be in thousands more films. I don't know. Either way, she's leaving The Walking Dead, it seems. But yeah, after about a 3-year storyline which was rubbish, and which did seem to manage to end The Walking Dead's sort of imperial phase as one of the big shows that everyone watched and turn it back into a sort of niche thing. It's actually been quite good. They've introduced a new set of villains from the comics, the Whisperers, who are people who skin zombies and wear their skin, partly as a sort of camouflage thing, partly because apparently it stops the zombies from smelling and eating them, and partly, because it's a horror show and it's really creepy. And they sort of hide around corners, whispering. You can never tell whether a zombie is a zombie or a whisperer. And they've got Samantha Morton playing the main whisperer, and she's quite intense and unsettling in a slightly different way to the previous villains, who were mostly just men giving supervillain speeches. She's sort of constantly intense and angry without needing to be quite as theatrical about it. It's impressive. It's still The Walking Dead. It's still a sort of ongoing soap opera of death in a forest. Sad people wandering around waiting for their turn to die. But it seems to be on one of its better runs. If you got bored during Series 8 and didn't come back for Series 9, like I nearly didn't, it's actually been alright. I'm still not going to go and watch Fear the Walking Dead, though.
Yeah, so I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and they said one of the things that had put them off The Walking Dead when it went through a sort of low phase was that the appeal of it at first was kind of similar to Game of Thrones, that anyone could get it. Anyone could be killed at any point, regardless of how big a star you were or how kind of hero-like your trajectory appeared to be. You're not necessarily going to win out. You might just be cut down in your prime, like, Robb Stark, for example. But then they said they went off the show when it clearly became there's a group of main characters who are sort of the heroes and they can't really get it. They will survive.
Yeah, there's about 3 or 4 main characters who just won't die, many of whom are the ones I just mentioned. And everyone else is just this orbit of B-listers who appear, get about 1, maybe 2 seasons to try and build up some sympathy and then get it.
Yeah.
They are knocking off a few of the main characters, although I don't know, I guess I shouldn't broadcast Walking Dead spoilers in the intro sequence.
Who knows, but I guess maybe there'll be some surprises left when they dispatch some more main characters, as it sounds like they might.
Yeah, apparently, and this might be asking for trouble, but I think by the time this episode airs, I should be fine. Well, by the time this podcast episode goes out, I mean. But yeah, apparently there was a big, death or series of deaths or, mini massacre in the most recent episode to air in Britain. I haven't seen it yet, so this is top-level useless coverage. But fortunately, The Walking Dead has dropped slightly, as I say, from its position at the top of the pop culture hierarchy down to somewhere just sort of floating in the middle. And as a result, no one spoiled it for me on Twitter.
Oh, right.
It's been as of today, nearly a week since the episode airs, and I know someone, possibly some people, plural, die, but I have no idea who they are. And I've only got 2 episodes left to catch up, so I'd like to thank The Walking Dead for sabotaging its own success so that I could watch this episode spoiler-free. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and still be on Twitter.
And still the Twitter all the live long day, yeah, without accidentally seeing a spoiler.
Because it's like, when a new episode of Game of Thrones comes out, I generally think the opinion is, you've got until Monday night, and you're basically okay. There seems to be, it comes out in America on Sunday evening, then there's, obviously that's the small hours of the morning in Britain, and then generally, although there's a few Americans who might enthusiastically tweet spoilers, there usually seems to be a truce until kind of about midway through Monday evening when there's opinion, right, if you've not watched it by Monday evening, then you deserve a spoiler.
Because Sky Atlantic air it on Monday evening in the UK.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you haven't seen it, roughly around the time that the Sky Atlantic version airs, then you're probably going to get it, yeah. And yes, obviously the posting Game of Thrones spoilers or heavily implied Game of Thrones spoilers in the middle of the day on Monday is the behaviour of a sadist arsehole.
Yeah.
Take note, my friends.
Spoilers are coming.
By the time this episode airs, Game of Thrones will either have resumed or be about to resume, I can't quite keep track of the calendar. And yeah, don't post Game of Thrones spoilers mid-through the day on a Monday. It's a horrible thing to do. Don't even post the name of a character and then nothing else, because that clearly means they're dead. And anyone who does that, pretends that they weren't really posting a spoiler, is being deeply disingenuous and tedious. Just saying.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's my feelings on The Walking Dead and my friends. Alistair, what have you been doing or hating?
So you've been watching a show that's been around for quite a while. I've been watching a brand new Amazon Prime TV show, which is Hannah, based on the 2011 film of the same name that was starring Eric Bana and Cate Blanchett. They seem to have taken this kind of moderately successful thriller and made it the basis of a new, at least 10-part TV show, possibly, with additional series to follow. The film I really, really liked when it came out, but I don't think it was like a huge hit. It was very much kind of, this is a really good thriller. That's, it seemed to have got a lot of buzz and good reception at the time. I don't seem to remember it being this like enormous commercial hit. So I think it's a slightly offbeat, unusual choice to base a TV show on. Because Amazon Prime are pushing it quite heavily. There's adverts all over IMDb for it and all over the London Underground. But so far it's been a fairly faithful TV adaptation of the film. I think it's quite well paced. They've got all the bits of the film that I liked. All the sort of the same characters are handled well. The one thing it's missing is that the film had this amazing soundtrack by the Chemical Brothers. The music on the TV show is not quite as good. But other than that, I'm enjoying it so far.
That's an impressive turnaround, considering when we were watching Us, the film we were about to discuss in the cinema, a trailer for this came up and you seemed surprised it existed. So I assumed you went straight home and got on that.
Pretty much, yeah.
Advertising works, kids.
Yeah, especially as I did really like the film Hannah. I can't recommend enough people actually going and watching that. If you're on the fence about the TV show or think that, like, do I need another 10-part streaming service TV show in my life? There is like a shorter film version. But it's interesting, though, because, I don't know, I've seen the first couple of episodes and they've stuck quite close to the plot of the film, even though at a sort of slightly slower pace. But still actually, going through it quite quickly. So I'm interested to see what they're going to do with like the whole series, because they're going to have to come up with something original.
I mean, I guess it's about an assassin, or at least a former assassin or something.
Yeah.
Spoilers, I know very little about the plot of Hannah, except what I've seen implied in trailers. It seems to be about someone who is an assassin or a trained killer or something.
Yeah.
So, presumably, if you want to make a TV show about it, she could just go back to work, can't she? But I don't know how that works with the plot.
Yeah, that might happen, because, it's an interesting one. The plot, roughly, is about this sort of teenage girl who lives in the middle of the forest with her dad, who's a sort of implied kind of survivalist, in that they live in caves and they kill and hunt their own food and like you sort of make their own clothes and things like that, animal skins. And he's also training her to fire weapons, speak multiple languages, martial arts, hunting. It's slowly revealed that he used to be some kind of soldier assassin and he kidnapped her from some kind of secret facility when she was a baby. They're being hunted by sort of nebulous government types and violence ensues.
Yeah.
So, they could, again, link up with Hannah going back into the organisation her father works for, I suppose. That might be the plot of future series.
Yeah, there's a part of me that might be, I don't know, this is the part that's just generally tied with franchises, I guess. It always gets a bit suspicious with here's a TV show version of an old film. I'm not sure how many of them I think of have massively taken off and become ongoing successes in their own rights. I'm sure there must be one or two, but their names escape me at this moment.
No, the TV adaptation based on films hasn't been like a huge venue for success in the same way that, say, adaptation of famous comic, like The Walking Dead, has been. Maybe it's because once you take a film and try and spin it out into a TV show, you run out of plot.
Well, yeah, like almost every writing manual in the world will say you could rarely go wrong with paring it down and making it shorter. And it's therefore quite hard to fight the feeling that by spinning it out and making it 6 times longer, you're probably somehow making it worse.
Yeah, but see, for example, American Gods, which is a fairly chunky book, but I don't know, they've already done, a 10-part TV show, and then they're doing, I guess, like another series of the 10-part TV show, and I assume they haven't finished all the plot of the book. It is, like, remarkably slow-paced.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're aiming for the about 5 years mark that seems to be the hallmark of most of these premium shows, but yeah, American Gods is particularly slow off the mark. Certainly, season 2 started recently and I don't feel any hurry in my bones to get on and watch it. It's possible I might eventually, but I can't say I can feel that bothered at this stage.
No. Well, the good thing about Hannah is it's not really slow paced. The film has like kind of in the sort of middle bit a big set piece escape, which I thought they'd save for about episode 5 or 6, and they do it in the second episode, which made me think, all right, okay, they're going through this plot quite quickly, but what they're going to do with like the later episodes, I guess, come up with brand new things. And I suppose the film was like, people like it, but it's not, they can change the plot a lot because people aren't that attached to it. I think probably things like American Gods, people might be more upset if they change the plot radically. And they could go, I suppose, the way of The Handmaid's Tale, which is you've got quite a small amount of plot. What is a great book, but it is quite a short book that is not also particularly plot heavy. It's more about character and mood. So I guess obviously they do all the plot from the book in the first series and then just go off and do their own plot afterwards. So
yeah, although isn't Margaret Atwood writing a second book?
She is now, yeah.
How close it'll hew to whatever they're doing in seasons 2 onwards of Handmaid's Tale, I don't know. But
I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, and our main feature this week, we are talking about the new movie Us, written and directed by Jordan Peele, starring Lupita Nyong'o, Winston Duke, Elizabeth Moss and Tim Heidecker, and it's about a family who go on holiday back to to their family home near a beach where the mum, the Lupita Nyong'o character, had a scary experience as a kid and soon finds that experience is going to come back to haunt them in the form of a family of identical duplicates who confront them at their house. And some other things happen as well, but that's probably spoilers. There's quite a lot of twisty stuff in this film. I imagine we may do a spoiler warning and then talk about the ending later. But for now, Alistair, what did you think of this film?
In general, I liked it. I thought it was good. I'd recommend people seeing it. It had some good horror set pieces. That was kind of what I liked the most about it. Like some really good, tense and scary scenes that kind of, you really got invested in. Especially the scene that's, I think, kind of the middle of the film, which is the one that features most heavily in the trailer, when the 4 doppelgangers invade the holiday home. There's some great scenes in it. It's scary, it's violent, everything you want from a horror movie. Great performances, great writing. If I had a criticism of it, I would say I think the plot kind of goes off the boil, especially towards the end, and becomes a little bit nonsensical. The tension maybe goes out of it later on as it becomes less a horror movie and more a sort of violent thriller. But I still think the plot in this film is basically an excuse to hang scary and violent set pieces on, so it does its job fine, and the set pieces are very good. So I left the film thinking, yeah, I enjoyed that. That was good.
I'm going to say roughly what Alistair said, only I'm probably going to sound slightly harsher about it. I thought it was pretty entertaining for the most part, although in the final third I thought it vaulted off the boil quite noticeably. I think, although it's all relatively nicely shot and the dialogue's very entertaining and everyone's doing a good performance, especially Lupita Nyong'o in her sort of dual roles as the regular version of the mum of the family and the evil duplicate version. I thought the last third was really odd. I thought it felt like it got away from a lot of the stuff I liked about the first 2/3 and tried to do something else, which was, I mean, this is the sort of thing we've talked about before. Jordan Peele opted to do something slightly ambitious and not play it safe in the last third of this film, and as a result, I don't think it entirely paid off. I think the last third of this film is verging on what I've described before as interesting failure territory. As in, it's going to be very interesting to talk about why it doesn't work, but I still don't think it especially works. But yeah, the whole thing is made so professionally and entertainingly for the most part that you can get through it fine. I just think in the last third, even if there's still good actors acting goodly, you can still just sort of sit back and go, but what the fuck? I mean, he certainly tried to do something a bit different from Get Out in that, although you can certainly read a certain degree of allegory into this, I think there is definitely meant to be at least some degree of allusion to these duplicates. The Tethered, they're called. I don't think it's a particular spoiler to call them what they're called. The Tethers, these duplicates that exist, as this sort of ignored underclass who suffer, while the main characters, who are all noticeably, I don't know, middle class, upper middle class, fairly well off, just go about a nice life. I can't imagine that illusion is unintentional. The idea that there are other people who are just like us, but they have a shit life while we have a nice one. But, if anything, the various plot moves in the last third just make that illusion, I don't know, it drowns it so much in weird fantasy stuff that it kind of, if anything, it weakens that illusion, which is one way in which the film goes a bit ugh. And that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right that where it's weakest is at the end. And yeah, I would probably describe the ending as an interesting failure. What I liked about the film is that even though it's like very much like a genre horror movie, like it's sold as like this is a horror movie, it's got like creepy, scary scenes in it. This isn't supposed to be like some kind of really expressive, like artistic film, but within the confines of like a genre horror movie, Jordan Peele's tried to do something different and interesting, rather than just trying to make something that's more what you'd expect. And I like the fact that he tried to do something different and unusual, and the fact that he aspired to do something more ambitious and fell short. I kind of rate that better than aiming low and succeeding. I kind of feel like a lot I think like in gymnastics, like you can score higher by doing more ambitious stuff that doesn't quite come off than you can for just by doing like a safe routine that's like well executed. And I kind of feel that that should be the same with film. But obviously there are problems with the plot, and it is kind of getting to the twisty spoiling bit. So I don't know, I've got some other things that are non-spoilery to say before we dive full in and discuss why the ending doesn't work so well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's odd that the horror never feels that, like, threateningly, dangerously horrific. My memory of Get Out has faded a bit over the years. I only watched it once, the time I think we saw it to cover in this podcast. But I remember it feeling a bit more harrowing and a bit more like the threat was real, whereas in this film, it maybe feels like they're slightly play up the... I don't know, maybe the comedy's the wrong word, but it sometimes feels a bit more like a sort of tense, scary fantasy drama than it does a hard horror. Like, it is, yeah. Anyway, I guess it's hard to talk about that without spoiling things in depth as well. But then again, horror and comedy aren't, a million miles from each other.
That's one of the interesting things about this film, is that a lot of the scenes are quite funny as well as quite scary. And I think it's, as you say, horror and comedy are quite closely related. When there's a tense moment, it can go either way, and that it can break into terror or it can break into humour. And I think Jordan Peele's a really good director in that he can handle both simultaneously. Like when we were in a cinema, some bits and people were like properly laughing, and within like a minute's time, everyone was like silent, just like transfixed by the tension of what's going on. And it takes like a really good director to be able to like handle that transition well.
Well, yeah, with Jordan Peele, he came up in was it a sketch group or a comedy anthology or something? Key and Peele. And yeah, I think the fact that he can actually do comedy and do it well does, if nothing else, it's a good way to, skip through making you like the characters. Because if the characters come across as funny, nice and well-adjusted people who you genuinely had a laugh with, it's a good way to actually make you care when they start getting attacked by the stabby duplicates. I mean, a lot of films will try and do this, but the banter will be lame film banter. But because Jordan Peele actually is genuinely funny, it does make you care more when they start dying, or at least getting stabbed at, which is quite nice.
Yeah, you're right. The humour is what makes you like the characters, which is what makes you more invested in them when they start getting attacked. I mean, partly some of the really good like sort of comedic performances, as well as like kind of the moments of tension. Like for example, I thought Winston Duke playing Gabe, the father, I thought he was excellent. He was like, throughout the whole movie, I just look at him and go, oh, he's such a dad. He's just like, the kind of, he's bought this like crappy old boat and he's like so impressed with it and things like that. And he tries hard, but in a kind of slightly bumbling way. And yeah, it's just really funny to watch.
Well, yeah, he comes across as a likeable dad figure without being a sort of annoying comedy film man who can barely take care of himself. It's nicely done.
Yeah, the characters are very well written. You can really believe in them as a family and their family dynamic. Yeah, and also I thought the bit it's also in the trailer when Gabe, the dad, sort of has to go out and threaten the duplicate family when they first appear. I think it's a superbly well acted scene, as the guy is acting someone pretending to be tough but clearly being scared, and you can see it in him that he is like, this is a scared man acting tough. And I think it's trying to do two emotions at the same time must be like much more challenging for an actor.
Yeah, no, Winston Duke was really good at this. I mean, Lupita Nyong'o is going to get a lot of, the acting plaudits for her dual role. Well, almost all the characters in this have a dual role, but Winston Duke's and all the other, basically, other than Nyong'o, the dual roles are quite sort of limited, vaguely henchman-y.
Oh, yeah, I just want to take a moment to say that he did a really good performance, because he is very good in this film, but Lupita Nyong'o is like phenomenal. She is like, clearly the core of the film. Partly because, as you say, she does two performances really well. She does the kind of the mother role, and she is really like the main character. She's like kind of the emotional core of the film, the mother of the family, the person who's kind of got the link to the scary stuff that's going on. And she does the kind of the hero role very well, and also plays the opposite, the doppelganger, who incredibly intensely and incredibly scary. She certainly should get a lot of praise for the excellent performance in this film. Like, yeah, she makes this film. I don't really see how it would work as well as it does if it wasn't for her being basically excellent.
Yeah, no, she's really good. I mean, they're both quite archetypal parts, I guess, but obviously her ability to switch between them is the impressive part.
Yeah, and also that's how horror movies work a lot of the time. Archetypal, normal family has something terrible happen to them.
I mean, to be honest, it's one of the reasons why, I don't know, the first 2/3 of its length, it is quite a standard sort of this one family has this thing happen to them. It's quite contained and intense. And then in the third act, I guess we probably should pull that spoiler ripcord soon, but yeah, I think it tries to go a bit wider, and one of the reasons it doesn't entirely work is because you were quite into this as this sort of intimate horror movie about these things happening to these people, and the bigger version kind of isn't as interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of what the decision they make. Are we going to cross the line?
I think so, yeah. So yeah, there we go. I think we've danced around our opinions enough. That's what we think of Us. It's an interesting film. I don't know if it entirely works in the end, but as an entry in Jordan Peele's filmography, it's certainly another interesting step, and I will still be fascinated to see what he does next after this and Get Out.
Well, I think what he's doing next is heading up the remake of The Twilight Zone.
Which does feel kind of apt, as this sort of scary, tropey, allegorical genre story is quite Twilight Zone-y.
Yeah, and as a friend of ours who we saw the film with said afterwards that, like, the ending felt like the sort of ending you'd get in an episode of The Twilight Zone, which is interesting because that friend at the time didn't know that that's Jordan Peele's next project. I mean, I do feel there were issues with the ending, partly because it's got that kind of problem twist ending, which is, the more you think about it, the less sense it makes.
By the way, listeners, we have, at this point, I think, gone to spoilers, so
yeah,
if you want to run, then run, as they say in the movie. They don't actually say that. Yeah. Are you talking about the whole third act, or just like the last 2 minutes?
I'm mainly talking about the third act.
Okay.
Yeah, they kind of reveal, okay, like I say, we are going full spoilers at this point. After a couple of quite violent set pieces, there's a reveal, which I don't think is in the trailer, that it's not just this family that has doppelgangers. It seems to be the whole world, or all of America, or, you know, some measure of everybody, or some measure of lots of people. There's another family that appear in one scene, you know, with Elizabeth Moss plays the mum, and they have, you know, murderous doppelgangers as well. Then it kind of gets bigger and bigger, and it kind of reveals this whole world, underground hidden world of doppelgangers called the Tethered, as you say. I just felt, as a revelation, it didn't work because, like, the more you think about it, the more it just made no sense and had, like, quite a few, like, large plot holes in it, such as the Tethered have to constantly perform whatever their opposite does, but at the same time, they also somehow manage to train and prepare for this, like, violent uprising in order to sever the tether. But I just don't see how that works. If you're tethered to the other person, you have to do what they do, which is shown in the film, them kind of doing military-esque drills and preparing for their rebellion.
Well, it's implied that somehow the main character, played by Lupita Nyong'o, obviously, meeting her duplicate, has somehow broken the tether, but now that they've realised what's happening, they just don't do it anymore. They just then spend the next, 20 years or so preparing for this uprising.
I guess so, but it doesn't make sense. At least it doesn't make sense to me, and I'm not particularly annoyed about that because it's just supposed to be a creepy revelation to get that weird, creepy feeling, and it sets up more set pieces.
Yeah, I don't know, there's just a lot of stuff like that, and the idea that it's meant to be happening everywhere just makes you sort of slightly confused, and then they're forming this massive chain across America, which I'm sure is... It's one of these things where you get scared of sounding stupid, but it's a strong image, but I'm not quite sure what it's actually saying.
Because they'd lived underground in this weird, slightly Lost-esque research facility. There's a quite heavy-handed explanation bit when the evil Lupita Nyong'o explains basically what the deal is in a quite unrealistic supervillain monologue bit.
It was very supervillain monologue. That was one bit which genuinely just seemed a bit... Jesus Christ. Like, I talked earlier about the connection between horror and comedy, and I do feel like that Lupita Nyong'o monologue was kind of the horror equivalent of explaining your joke at length.
Yeah.
It was just a bit sort of, oh god. I'm not sure that this is making it more scary.
No, it certainly isn't.
I mean, especially because the explanation he had, or she had, or whoever, the explanation the film had for the Tethered existing was quite mumbly and hand-wavy. You know, if you're going to give a massive monologue, at least have an amazing explanation that blows me away. But it was basically, there was an experiment, and then here we are.
Yeah.
And, fine, I guess. Honestly, it's one of these things where, I mean, yes, sometimes people who like hard sci-fi or heavily detailed fantasy might find it annoying that in horror movies, a lot of the time, the spooky, creepy thing just appears, and it just exists because it does.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the movie Us, or at least the last third of the movie Us, might serve as quite a good argument as to why, you know.
Yeah.
Trying to explain why these things that are basically allegories for things that scare us or things that make us feel a bit uncomfortable exist just gets a bit punishing. It just feels like you're breaking your back to explain something that was honestly much, much better not explained.
Yeah.
And that's my problems with the third act of Us.
Yeah, it's very monologue-y and it doesn't really make sense. And like I say, it kind of unwinds it because the more you think about it, the more it doesn't make sense. And then it's also kind of doubly confounded by, there's an additional twist right at the very end, which is the revelation that the mother, the Lupita Nyong'o you've kind of followed through most of the film, is actually the tethered one from underground, and they swapped in 1986 when they were kids. She's actually been someone from the underground living a perfect life above ground, and the woman who was born, or the girl who was born above ground, has been trapped underground. Which doesn't make sense, because then why does the evil Lupita Nyong'o have to explain what the deal is to the good one? Because the good one came from this world.
Well, the good one, I guess, through some combination of her being quite young and her having, movie psychological problems, just doesn't remember. Which I could have sort of bought, but I don't really understand why it changes anything. I mean, maybe it's meant to be a sort of parody of the horror movie ending of like, oh my god, the villain is still out there, which I'm sure we'll get to in our question section in a minute. But it doesn't actually create like a vivid sense of threat or even recast the plot that much, because clearly, based on everything we've seen in the film, she's grown up in the untethered world and become a normal adult with a family who seems well-adjusted and normal.
Yeah.
So therefore it doesn't really change anything. It does explain a couple of extra bits of the plot. Like, I assume it explains why her duplicate is the only one of the tethered who can talk, because she's not actually one of the tethered. I guess it maybe explains why her son can sort of control his duplicate. Yeah. I guess that's meant to be the implication.
Yeah, it doesn't add much to the plot.
It's a twist. It makes sense. It twists. It's maybe, I don't know, it's a callback to a conversation we were having a few podcasts ago. It risks tipping over into sort of a bit M. Night Shyamalan territory. It's a bit sort of, well done, you've had a twist.
Yeah, a twist for the sake of a twist.
When she went down there's a bit, towards the end, I guess we can just describe what happens at the end of the film now.
Yeah.
Very, very quickly. She chases her duplicate into the Hall of Mirrors where they met as a child, and they go down an escalator into the mysterious tethered complex where the tethered have been hiding all these years. And from then on, you do get into this weird... It's as someone who's seen too many films where something weird suddenly happens towards the end, the bit where she goes down the escalator and into these passages we've never really seen before is a bit sort of, okay, wow. Either I'm about to see something amazing, or this film is about to hurl itself off the rails.
I mean, it was like an unusual ending, and it was a bit different. I mean, we could have had a more ordinary horror movie that just kept the focus on the family and the doppelgangers who were trying to kill them. I mean, that would have been a much more straight-up horror movie, which I guess might have been more successful. I mean, he tried to do something, I guess, that was a bit different, which I appreciated, but like I say, for the reasons we discussed, I don't think it really worked. And I see with this film is like they were trying not to have a film that was quite as overtly about race in the way that Get Out was. I guess he didn't want to have the second half of the film or the last third of the film be an allegory about race the way that things were saying in Get Out. But I guess he was still trying to find a way for it to be different and it to be a slightly like unusual horror movie.
I don't know, I thought it might have been more about class than race, but I don't want to, dictate what the film's about.
Well, also, because in America, so much of class politics is race politics.
Fair enough.
Which is also, that's one of the things. I mean, when this film was sort of being talked about before it came out, like when the trailer came out, I think a lot of people said it was interesting that, or even surprising that Jordan Peele, who did a film that is so much about race, and in America today with Get Out, he's now doing a film that, some people say, well, it looks more like generic horror. But actually, I think this film is maybe in a slightly more subtle way, is also kind of about race in America right now. I mean, in several ways. For a start, it's kind of transgressive and unusual to make a horror movie about a middle-class African-American family. It is unusual because of, like I say, because of the state of racism in America that bleeds into popular culture. There's been very few horror movies about black families, and especially ones that are aimed at like a mainstream black and white cinema-going audience. They're not, I'm sure there's been films like blaxploitation films and things like that try to recreate 80s slasher movies but with a black cast. But the fact that this is aimed clearly at like a mainstream audience is like in itself sort of like transgressive. Also, there's the fact that like the metaphor of the film is like there's a secret hidden world of people who you exploit and you don't think about, and your actions have like untold repercussions on them, and they have to, sort of live this horrible existence while you have plenty. I mean, that can be an analogy for race in America. It can also be an analogy for class, as you say, or maybe like a sort of for race globally, where wealthy people in the West's lifestyle is obviously based on impoverished people who aren't white in the global South. So there are subtle things about this film. I think it's what Martin Scorsese once described as being a smuggler director, which is that you make a film that's aimed at a mainstream audience and is sort of, sold as a genre picture, but actually has buried within it something subtle and artistic to say, which is again something Martin Scorsese's done himself by making gangster movies that have something to say about America. And I think Jordan Peele is very much a director in that sort of 70s mold of I make genre stuff, and I make genre stuff that's a bit interesting.
Yeah, I think so. As I say, I think there's definitely allegorical stuff in there, even if it's not well served by some of the stuff we've talked about.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think probably consciously he's decided to make the allegorical stuff a bit less on the nose and the entire point of the film, because I guess he doesn't want to be seen as a one-trick pony, and he does sometimes just want to make a more straightforward genre piece, and fair enough.
I think it's interesting that this is like sort of sold as a straightforward genre piece when it's kind of not, but I guess it fits neater into the kind of genre box than maybe Get Out did, but it's still got sort of unusual flourishes.
Yeah, as I've said in previous podcasts, anything which ventures into interesting failure territory in any sense, if nothing else, is going to be good podcast fuel. Hi, it's Nick from the future. Just popping back to say that although often we do stop doing spoilers at this sort of midway question mark, on this occasion, because we're talking about endings, the spoilers for Us will continue. And there may also be other spoilers for well-known horror films, off the top of my head, including The Witch, Alien, Psycho, Dog Soldiers, Scream. So yeah, if you're overly concerned with spoilers for horror films and you haven't seen these relatively well-known films, then this might be time to run. Some of the spoilers are quite mild, but still, just to let you know. Anyway. Okay, we've just spent a while talking about the ending of Us, but what is the ideal horror movie ending? Is it one that just murders everyone in a big pile, or is it one that keys you up for the sequel? Alistair, what do you think?
I think there's some things about horror movie endings that are kind of specific to horror movies. There's things that are sort of general all movies were, or at least all sort of mainstream movies should have, which is kind of key you up for the sequel. It will get you excited about what you just saw. But for horror endings, I mean ending broadly is in like last thirds. As we know, we discussed the kind of last third of Us. There's usually like a mystery in horror, also like something unusual is happening, something creepy is happening, such as, there's an exact duplicate of each member of your family coming to kill you for some reason. And then horror movies have to get to some point when they kind of reveal what the deal is, or reveal the monster. And I think this is like, handling this bit is kind of essential for a horror movie. There are so many good horror movies that have kind of, they've got great build-up, but when it comes to the point of revealing the monster, they let it down because the monster's rubbish, or it makes no sense, and it just kind of confuses you, and it kind of ruins it.
So, like exactly what we just said about Us.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't go as far to say it ruins it in Us, but it is less convincing. It makes what you just saw less convincing. I was probably more on board when it was this kind of scary home invasion film.
Yeah.
And usually with horror movies, the broad pattern, I think, is this kind of creepy weirdness, usually based on the fear of the unknown and the strange, up until the point when you have to reveal what the deal is. And then they kind of tip over into ultra-violence, because when you know what the thing is, it stops being creepy and weird, so there's nowhere left to go. I think the film that handles this the best, and it's probably my favourite horror movie of all time, is Don't Look Now.
Okay.
Which is exceptional, but we could discuss it more and why I think it's good, but it will obviously involve completely ruining the ending. But the crucial thing about Don't Look Now, I should say, which isn't a spoiler, is that it saves the revelation to about the last minute of the film. So it's like loads and loads of weird, creepy stuff. Those are great build-up. There's a revelation in the last minute, and it just goes into ultra-violence for what surely must be only be like a minute, 2 minutes, and then the film ends. And that's, I think, well-handed, because they postpone the moment as long as possible. And lots of people say that ending doesn't make sense, but it's over so quickly that there's no real time for you to kind of unwind all the feelings that you've had. To say more, I guess, would involve spoiling Don't Look Now, which we can do in a bit, but I've talked enough. So what's your opinion, Nick?
Yeah, the horror movie ending that sat with me the most, and I don't know if that's because it's the perfect ideal horror movie ending or not, but the one that I find most memorable is probably The Ring, actually. The American Ring. I haven't seen the Japanese ones, which I'm sure makes me a bad critic, but in my defence, I never pretended to be a horror movie expert. Yeah, I found the American version of The Ring did mess me up severely, and in the same way, I've never felt any desire to see the sequels, and to be honest, based on what little I know of the Japanese ones, and I'm sure the original Japanese one is good for roughly the same way that the American one is good, but all the other ones seem very bent on explaining the evil child. What's her name? Samara or Samara? I think she's a virus or something? maybe, in the Japanese films, which to me sounds as stupid in the same way that a lot of the explanation in Us is stupid. So yeah, I think it's a bit that's amazing in that moment, and yeah, to be honest, I can see with a lot of these films that the appeal is just get in, show the scary thing, and get out, because a lot of the time, when the horror movie ends by bringing on the monster, and then you can see the monster, and then the heroes just have to kind of run away from it or hack at it for 20 minutes, it just deflates the excitement a lot. I mean, A Quiet Place did a reasonably good job. I think A Quiet Place is a horror movie. It's somewhere on the action horror spectrum.
I'd call it a horror movie.
Does a decent job of just about keeping the evil thing off screen enough that it's still kind of unsettling when it appears.
Yeah.
Although I found the ending of A Quiet Place quite weird because I don't know why. It wasn't grumpy and cynical enough. Might just be me.
I think A Quiet Place kind of did the opposite approach to horror movies, which is to what I described, which is you show the thing at the beginning, and then you kind of make the whole film be about the thing that you've kind of revealed. And those sometimes tend to be the horror movies that rely more on violent imagery, because you show the thing at the beginning, and then you get to see it being ultra-violent throughout the rest of the film. Or, I guess, like a lot of ghost sort of based horror movies that don't try to play with a sense of, is this real? Are ghosts real? Is it all in their head? What's the mystery? Horror movies, they're basically like, there's an evil poltergeist in this house, it's going to try and kill you. They deal away with mystery fairly early on, but then have lots of creepiness. I mean, there's been quite a few films like that, which I think is the kind of the approach that A Quiet Place went for.
Yeah, I mean, A Quiet Place did go for the just bring it on and make it visible approach, yeah. Although it still kept it out of reach. Like, it didn't at any point become, routine. Like, the monster was never, there hanging around long enough for you to just sort of get used to it. I felt like they always kind of shot around it so that it was still slightly mysterious and unknown, rather than it just turning up every 30 seconds.
Which kept the sort of the mystery.
Possibly I was talking about Quiet Place a lot because I only seem to see about one horror movie a year, and obviously this year I've seen Us, and last year I saw Quiet Place.
Yeah.
And the year before that, was that Get Out? Possibly.
Yeah, I think it was. But then there was also, I mean, there's lots of classic horror movies, like The Exorcist, for example, that I think also goes for it shows the monster quite early. I mean, it's got quite a creepy build-up, but there isn't sort of a twist or a revelation that obviously it's a demonically possessed child. The rest of the film is about the exorcism of this child. And that film is very, very good, I must say, actually. Mark Kermode says it's his favourite movie of all time, and I would say that it is a brilliant film. Slightly ruined, I think, by unnecessary sequels, but other than that.
To bring in Get Out itself, I guess Get Out is a bit different in that it didn't have a monster, per se. Or at least it was one of these films where, the monster is just a person, rather than the monster being a fantasy beast of any kind.
Yeah.
But Get Out does actually allow... Is it a spoiler to describe the ending of Get Out at this point?
I think it's alright. Well, spoiler warnings from now on.
Well, slight spoiler warning for Get Out, but yeah, in Get Out, they just get away, and it's a moderately happy ending, which, I don't think there are any hints that the baddie, is still alive and coming for them or anything.
No. Which is kind of like an acceptable horror movie ending, which is there's one person who survives. I mean, there's the film, Joss Whedon's film, Cabin in the Woods, which obviously is riffing on horror movie tropes, in the point that, they have to make sacrifice of these kind of 5... archetypes to appease the kind of vengeful gods of this universe through the medium of kind of horror movie tropes. And if that sounds confusing, it does actually really make sense when you see that film. But yeah, there's a bit when they say, when one of the teenagers is sort of surviving at the end, the architects of the horror basically say, it's okay if one survives so long as they're sufficiently traumatized. Which is kind of, very much a horror movie ending, which is there's the bleak, everyone ends up dead. And then there's the kind of Get Out-esque sort of ending of, it's okay if someone survives so long as they're sufficiently traumatized. And it's fair to say that the guy from Get Out was probably fairly traumatized by that experience.
I mean, Cabin in the Woods had it went fairly hard on the bleak ending in the end, didn't it? Things went to shit to an impressive degree in the end of Cabin in the Woods. Yeah,
well, I guess partly because it's a commentary on horror movie tropes. The plot is cleverly engineered to get several endings in, so they can have comments on different endings. They have the bleak ending as well as the slightly less bleak ending, which is someone gets to live so long as they're sufficiently traumatized. So yeah, there's always, various kind of, cabin in the woods or things go crazy in the outback sort of films when there's, usually ends with one person, usually a female character who's the sort of considered to be the morally and usually sexually the purest, kind of staggers out of the woods, blood-soaked, looking fairly traumatized, crawls back to civilization, and you feel like, well, she lived, but her life is never going to be the same.
And that's the ideal horror movie ending.
That is a fairly standard horror movie ending, and there's loads of films that do that. And that's why I was saying what I liked about Us. It didn't do the standard horror movie ending. They could have ended with, like, they could have had this big bloody home invasion film that ends with the family slowly just like staggering out, I know, into the daylight after their nightmare home invasion ends, all looking traumatized and bloodied, but basically okay. And that would have been a very kind of, yeah, that's a textbook horror movie ending. But Jordan Peele decided to do something different.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the ways in which it doesn't feel like that's bleak and awful a horror film, and not that many people die. Or at least the people who do die are from the sort of annoying comic relief family off to the side.
Very much supporting cast, yeah.
But then again, I mean, maybe because his films are a bit more on the explicitly comedy side of horror. Like, I don't think they're as much of a sort of trope piss take as, say, again, Cabin in the Woods. But Get Out and Us have more of a sense of humour and are definitely a bit more sort of wry with their commentary, and therefore maybe it would have been a bit more weird if it was also a complete bloodbath. I don't know.
They're aware that they're genre films and they're playing with the tropes of genre. But this is also where I think Us actually is, again, trying to do something subtle and sort of do make a commentary in a subtle way, which is that it's also a fairly well-known trope of horror movies that the black characters get killed first. And Us is a film when all the white characters get killed and none of the black characters do, apart from, I guess, there's the black villains. But yeah, the white family not only die in this film, but they die twice. First, all the regular white family dies, and then the tethered version of the white family dies. So, yeah. I don't know. In an old-fashioned horror movie, it'd be the black family that gets killed and the white family that gets to live. So I think he's trying to do something subtly there within the confines of genre.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's similar to with what you were saying about the is it the final girl they call it in TV tropes land?
Yeah.
The one female character who survives a lot of horror films. Isn't Buffy meant to be a degree of commentary on that?
Yeah.
The one female character who, it turns out, is actually a badass and saves everybody.
Yeah, obviously Buffy is very much riffing on many horror movie tropes. Several, like the lone female survivor, also the kind of the cheerleader that gets got fairly early on. I think in the original film, but that Joss Whedon made before the TV show, Buffy was a cheerleader?
Possibly. I don't think I ever actually got around to watching the original film.
I should have researched this before I just started randomly spitballing this hot take live on air. But anyway, Buffy is supposed to be, what have we made as the supporting character in a genre piece, like the main character, which Us is kind of as well, which is what have we made the kind of the comedy sidekick black family the main characters.
Well, yeah, because the white family, the Elizabeth Moss family, are basically awful and just a combination of stereotypes, which, again, is what a lot of the black families are in a lot of these other films.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of great horror movie endings, as Us has, there's the twist, the bit at the ending that makes it all make sense. Obviously, great example of this is Psycho, 1960 Alfred Hitchcock film. Should we go into spoilers here? I mean, if you've not seen Psycho by this point.
I certainly have not. I'm quite familiar with the horror movie ending trope where they reveal that the bad thing or evil monster isn't actually dead or is still out there.
Yeah.
Which serves as a nice dual role of number one, providing that last kick of endearing danger, and number two, setting up a sequel. Is it as big a thing to have a twist that reframes the whole movie? I don't know.
There are a few. I mean, it is common enough that it does happen. I mean, the other species of horror movie twist is the kind of reveal who the killer is. That's obviously a classic one. There's Scream. Again, Scream was an attempt to, well, it is, riffing on horror movie tropes. Films, from like Scream or the original Friday the 13th, things like that. There's a murderer in a mask butchering people in a nasty way. One of the endings is the twist, like, who is it? And I quite like, again, a good horror movie is when they play around with the mask off revelation. Again, are we going to do spoilers for Scream? Came out 23 years ago?
Go ahead, I've not seen it, but...
Yeah. Well, anyway, just briefly, like, what I quite liked about Scream is quite clever, is that the revelation is that there's two people in masks. Well, that what you've been seeing, the guy going around wearing the Scream mask, killing people, is actually not one person, it's two. And you've got a narrow group of characters. And the whole film, like, one of these people is the murderer. And I really can't work out which one, especially because there's a piece of evidence, like, one of them's always been on screen during one of the murders. And you're like, that's because there are two people. It catches you off guard. But again, like, the whole point of Scream is it's riffing on horror movie tropes, so it doesn't have a tropey ending.
Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to remember the ending of Dog Soldiers, but... going through the very small number of horror movies I've actually seen.
He blows up the house. I think Dog Soldiers does have what is another horror movie ending, which is you think the creature's dead, and then it comes back for one last fight at the end.
Yeah.
Alien being obviously the brilliant example of this, that the Nostromo explodes, you think she's got out, you think it's fine, and obviously it's in the escape pod with her.
the old classic, but I feel like it's been always somewhat ruined by the fact that I always seem to go into films and TV shows and stuff with a rough knowledge of how long they're going to be.
Yeah.
And a vague sense of passing time in my mind. So if I know that the baddie is, air quotes, dead, but there's still half an hour of film to go, then unless you're watching something really weirdly paced, like the last ever David Tennant episode of Doctor Who, the bad guy's probably going to come back for another go.
Yeah. But I think it's partly also because we're so aware of tropes and also the kind of the language of film that you get this weird sense of like, this isn't the ending because it seems somehow not the right point for the ending to fall. I mean, I'm not old enough to know, but in 1979, 1980, when Alien came out, maybe that was fresher. This kind of, people weren't as used to the language of film so that they could get away with that. Or basically, that particular twist hadn't been done so many times that people expected it. The old, it's dead. No, it's not actually dead. So yeah, I mean, there's various different types of endings. Usually I feel maybe it's because horror movies are more genre-y, that they rely more on things like a twist or things like that.
Well, yeah, I think it's the grand jump scare tradition. You want to get one more big moment. I think one reason why it's good to reveal the big monster and then possibly try and get out quicker rather than just have it chase people around, unless you've got an amazingly tense way of pulling that off.
Yeah, I think Don't Look Now is the best horror movie because it does exactly that. I mean, it's nice to have like a good grim bit on the end. I don't know, like The Thing, for example, brilliant horror movie that just ends with just on a very grim note. My other favourite sort of horror movie ending, which is the protagonist decides to join the bad guy and become bad at the end. See, for examples of this. Well, actually, I suppose, again, this is going to be spoilers. So yeah, if you don't see loads of horror movies, this whole section probably is best avoided for spoilers. But yeah, see The Witch and Rosemary's Baby, for example. So at the end, the person decides, like, maybe it's just better to be a bad guy and get on board with all this creepy nastiness.
I like those endings because they don't happen quite as often, and it's always, in some way, quite hard to pull off, I suppose. It's not always that obvious that your protagonist is going to suddenly become, full-on evil.
Yeah.
But the good ones of those are great. I love those.
I mean, what I liked about The Witch was that I thought it was going to go for the traumatized, lone surviving female ending, which is that it would end with Anya Taylor-Joy just wandering back into civilization, into that sort of small Protestant community you see right at the beginning of the film, looking suitably traumatized and, probably covered in the blood of the rest of her family. But that's not how it ends. It ends with her deciding she will become a witch and join Satan.
Which, even though it was presented in a way that was a little silly, it was still a good ending.
Yeah.
I think our main recommendation here is become a witch and join Satan.
Fair enough.
Off you go, lads.
That's all we have time for in this episode, but if you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, please subscribe in your podcatcher of choice so that you never miss an episode. And while you're there, please leave us a review, as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can check out back issues of the podcast, bonus audio content, and short written pieces by Nick and myself. If you go to the website right now, there should be a short piece about what epic science fiction novels I would like adapted into films.
And if you want still more content, you can go to the various social media sites, well, as long as it's either Twitter or Facebook, because those are the two we are on. If you search us on Twitter or Facebook, you should be able to find our shiny purple logo under the name Moderate Fantasy Violence, where you will get all the latest podcast-related news updates, such as when we've failed to see the film we're meant to be recording, and that sort of thing. And I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me on the internet at nickbryan.com or at nickmb on Twitter for news of my comics, novels, and, which Weatherspoons I'm in that day, that sort of thing.
You can also follow me on Twitter, where I'm at Alistair J.R. Ball, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us next time when we'll be doing a British comedy special. In that episode, we'll be reviewing This Time with Alan Partridge, as well as looking at the second series of Fleabag and Derry Girls. Join us then for that. Goodbye.
Bye.
So you've been watching a show that's been around for quite a while. I've been watching a brand new show.
Yes, I know. I'm old and past it.
Yeah, well...
I didn't say...
I don't know what to say. I have no comeback to that.
Continue.